I'm going to show how to alter a pattern to add a modesty feature to a slit in a skirt. A lot of times when you have a knee-length straight skirt or pencil skirt, you have to be able to walk, so they'll add a slit into the pattern so that you can leave that open to walk. But that if it's a knee-length skirt, it puts the slit well above the knee. So if you want to be more modest, you can add a little extension to your pattern so that you can add these pleats to help you to be able to walk in the skirt. Okay, I have a little mock-up of a skirt pattern here. This would be your skirt back, and this would be your 5/8 inch seam allowance for the back of the skirt. If you have a skirt pattern that is cut on the fold without a seam allowance here, you would still have to extend it because we need a back seam allowance. And most skirts would have a zipper down about 7 inches from the waistline, so I'm just kind of mocking this up a little bit. And I'm going to extend this seam allowance out to 1 inch, plus I'm going to add the little pleat feature right here. If you've already purchased your fabric, you may not have enough fabric to rob an extra 3 inches off of it. So before you cut your fabric, make sure you have enough after altering your pattern to do this. If it doesn't work out, then you can always create another little pattern piece and make your extension with seam allowances beyond what we're going to draw, so that you can just sew it in. You'd have an extra little seam there, but at least you won't run out of fabric. You'll usually have enough scraps left over from your fabric to add that extra rectangle in there. But I'm going to show how to cut this out on the fold so you don't have that extra seam. You're going to need some scrap paper that's at least say about 4 inches wider than your pattern, maybe 4 or 5 inches. And what I'm going to do is just tape my original pattern down to my scrap paper here. And you'll see the markings that I have on here this would be where the pattern would tell you to stop sewing to make a slit. And I drew a line about 1/2 inch above that dot there. And then you would have some markings for your zippers and things like that. So the first thing I want to do is make this 5/8 inch seam allowance. I want to make it 1 inch because that's going to make a nicer pleat, in my opinion. So this is a 2-inch ruler, so I'm just going to lay this middle line on my original seam line. And I'm going to draw a new seam allowance, 1 inch. And I'm going to go all the way down to the hem with that. Okay, and the next thing I want to do is square up a line out from here to make an extension. Alright, this dotted line here is the center back seam, and this new green line that I have here is my new cut line. So I want my little extension piece to be 3 inches beyond the cut line. So again, I have a line drawn 1/2 inch up from that dot. So I'm just going to square this off and look at my ruler, my little ruler here, and I'm going to count 3 inches over to about right there. So I'm making a 3-inch extension from this. So let me mark down here 3 inches. I'm going to use this other ruler because it's wider, and I'm going to square this off and make a 3-inch extension. Alright, and this is my old pattern line, the old hem line, so I'm just going to extend that also. So this is my new pattern. But this line is not a cut line, it is a fold line. So you're going to be laying this on the fold of your fabric. So that's why I was saying you need plenty of fabric so that you can shove your pattern over from the edge and cut this out on the fold. So let me trim out this pattern piece and we'll cut out the fabric. So here's how my new pattern piece looks like. And so I'm going to fold my fabric so that I can lay this pattern out. Alright, here's the fold of my fabric, so I'm just going to pull my pattern piece over to that fold and pin it down, and then I'm not going to cut along this edge. It's going to stay as a fold in the fabric. But this is my new cut line. I'm going to cut across there and then back up to the top and cut out the rest of my skirt and along the hemline. Alright. So I'm going to call this the wrong side of my fabric, because this is just some old fabric that's damaged, and I save all this. See, it's faded in places, so I save all these to do practices and muslins and things like that. So this is going to be the right side of my fabric, and I want to go ahead and mark that 1-inch line there. Well, let's just go ahead and mark the whole seam allowance, even though I don't normally sew that way. And then I'm going to extend it all the way down to the hem, because what's going to happen, I'm going to draw a 1/2 inch down from this top of this little pleat there. So all we need is about a 1/2 inch there. You could get by with a 1/4, but this is going to be my stopping point. This would be where the slit used to be in the pattern, and then of course you'd have your zipper here. You'd want to go ahead and put your zipper in now if you're going to do an invisible zipper. So we're going to have a normal stitch length. We're going to stitch this down to here, and we're going to stop, and then we're going to reinforce the seam by back stitching, and then we're going to loosen our stitch length on the sewing machine and baste down to the bottom. I also want to draw another basting line 2 inches away from that, and I should have 2 inches left over there. If it's off a little bit, it won't matter. So this is a basting line and that's a basting line. But I don't want to sew this one yet. First I'm going to go to my sewing machine, sew my normal seam. Actually, I would install my zipper and then sew my normal seam and then baste down to this line here. Alright, I reinforced my seam there, and then this is just a long stitch, and I left some tails there so that I can easily pull out that basting later. So what I want to do now is go and press this seam open, which if you had already installed your zipper, you probably had already pressed this. And so just open this folded piece here out. I've got some thread in the way here. Just open this out and line up those centers as best as you can. It's not that crucial, but do the best you can and press this open. You can flip it over to the other side and get a better view of pressing that seam there. So I'm going to go and press this now. Alright, and the reason I like to just do the one basting line to begin with, it's easier to press this thing out if you don't have the other basting sewn in place yet. So let's open this back out just like it was. And then I want to sew along this other 2-inch line, and there's a crease there now. My marking pencil went away whenever I pressed this, but I have a nice little crease to sew along, so I'm going to go and baste along that line right there. Alright, if you wanted more pleats, you could add an extra inch to this and do 5 inches instead of the 3, but I don't like a lot of fabric underneath, so I've limited mine to just the 1. set of pleats. So now I'm meeting the one that we originally sewed. I'm going to meet that down to this center line as best I can. And then I want to open this one out. I need to open it out, excuse me, and stack them on top of each other. So I have my new one that I need to press, and I have the old one that I pressed before. That's the crease line that I had before. So just line them up as best you can with their centers all meeting that seam. And then go and press this down. I'm just about done here. Doesn't really take long once you've altered your pattern. So I've pressed this down, and I want to go and sew on the outside of the skirt. If you don't want any stitching, let's see if I can find my first sample that I did. If you don't want this top stitching, if it's a really dressy outfit, then you can skip what I'm fixing to do, but it doesn't bother me. You can take this to your sewing machine and just sew this piece together and stop at the seam, and then you can sew this piece together so it doesn't flop around. But I'm going to top stitch from the outside of my fabric, and I'm going to get a pin, and I'm going to mark that little 1/2 inch line. I don't know if you can still see it, so that I'll know where to stitch on the other side. Just stick a pin through there, and then I'm going to pin this down so it doesn't move around when I flip this. So now this is the outside of the skirt, and this is about the point where I want to sew that top stitching. So I'm going to lay everything out flat, and then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and sew straight across right there. Let me draw a line so you can see it. Just going to square up a line right there. It's going to be about 1 inch wide on each side of the center seam. Here's my center seam. So I'm just going to go and top stitch that down, and then I'll be finished with my my pleat. Obviously you'd be using matching thread, but you can see it better with the white. So you trim all your threads, and now we can remove the basting stitches, and hopefully I can pull these out easily. I used a really long stitch, and then one more. That one's going to be ornery. May have to get my trusty seam ripper out, but you get the idea. Just remove all those basting stitches, clean it up real nice, and you've got a nice little modesty panel in there. Go. Now you would hem this that way you would normally hem your skirt, but you're going to have to work around the pleats to do that, and then you would press them back out again once you've done your hem. You'd have to refold all this and crisp it up a little bit. There you have it.